The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Not a gentle buzz, not a polite chime, a full-throated scream that cut through the silence of my downtown Chicago apartment like a blade through silk. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I was reviewing quarterly projections for the Phoenix expansion, my laptop screen casting blue shadows across the hardwood floors. Coffee had gone cold hours ago. Marcus, my golden retriever, lifted his head from his bed, ears perked with concern. The caller ID made my blood freeze. Richard Blackwood, CEO. Richard never called after 6 p.m. Hell, Richard barely acknowledged. Weekends existed. In 3 years as Director of Digital Infrastructure at Blackwood Dynamics, I'd seen him work late exactly once, and that was when the SEC showed up unannounced. I remembered that day clearly. Richard had been sweating through his $3,000 suit, barking orders at anyone within earshot while the SEC investigators quietly reviewed our financial systems. He'd pulled me aside, his cologne sharp with panic, and whispered, "Make sure they can't access anything sensitive. Use your override codes if you have to." I'd nodded and done exactly what he asked, while quietly ensuring every access attempt was logged and timestamped. Richard thought I was covering for him. I was actually creating a digital paper trail. That was 18 months ago. I should have paid more attention to why he was so nervous. I answered on the 4th ring. "Madison." His voice was different. Sharp. Cold. Like winter air through broken glass. "Richard? Is everything, you're fired. Effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it as if the device itself had betrayed me. In the background, I could hear something. Was that music? Jazz, maybe. Like he was calling from a restaurant or a hotel bar. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me correctly. Security will escort you out Monday morning. Don't bother coming in early." A pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Clean out your desk. Leave your laptop, your access cards, everything." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. 3 years of 70-hour weeks. 3 years of building their entire cloud infrastructure from nothing. 3 years of making Richard look like a visionary while I worked in the shadows. Just last month, he'd stood in front of the board of directors and taken credit for our 40% increase in processing efficiency. He'd called it visionary leadership and strategic technological advancement. He never mentioned that I'd spent 6 months rewriting the entire back-end architecture to achieve those results. "Richard, I don't understand. Did something happen? Is this about the Denver project? The Phoenix security audit?" I could hear him breathing, heavy and deliberate. In the background, that jazz music continued, and I caught the faint sound of clinking glasses. He was definitely at a bar. Or a party. Who fires someone from a party? "It's about loyalty, Madison. Something you apparently don't understand." Loyalty. The word hung in the air like smoke. I thought about all the times I'd saved his reputation. The Denver disaster recovery that I'd pulled off in 72 hours. The compliance violations I'd quietly fixed before auditors noticed. The system vulnerabilities I'd patched without ever asking for recognition. What does that mean, exactly? Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, "It means you ask too many questions. It means you dig where you shouldn't dig. It means you've forgotten who signs your paychecks." The line went dead. I sat there for what felt like hours, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air. Marcus patted over and rested his massive head on my knee, sensing something was wrong. His dark eyes reflected the laptop screen. And for a moment I saw my own face there, pale, shocked, but something else starting to surface beneath the hurt. Loyalty. What the hell did that mean? I'd given Blackwood Dynamics everything. When their legacy systems crashed during the holiday shopping season 2 years ago, who worked 96 hours straight to rebuild their entire e-commerce platform. When their data got corrupted during the Kansas City merger, who recovered everything from backups nobody even knew existed, the Kansas City incident. That was where I first started to notice the patterns. I'd been deep in the recovery process, pulling corrupted files from damaged servers, when I found something that didn't belong. Financial records buried in what should have been client data directories. Nothing dramatic, just payment authorizations and vendor contracts that seemed to bypass our normal approval process. I'd mentioned it to Richard the next day. Casually. "Hey, I found some finance files mixed in with the corrupted data. Should I route them back to accounting?" His reaction was intense. Too intense for misfiled paperwork. He practically lunged across his desk to grab the printouts from my hand. "I'll handle this directly," he'd said. "Don't mention it to anyone else." Sometimes executives handle sensitive vendor relationships personally. I'd nodded, filed it away as executive weirdness, and gone back to rebuilding servers. But I'd also quietly created backups of those financial records. Not because I suspected anything criminal, just because I was meticulous about data integrity. That backup still existed. Hidden in a partition that Richard didn't know about, along with a dozen other data integrity copies I'd created over the years. Me. Madison Cole. The woman who'd just been fired over a midnight phone call with zero explanation. I opened my laptop, muscle memory guiding my fingers to the Blackwood server dashboard. My access was already revoked. Every system I'd built, every protocol I'd designed, every safeguard I'd implemented, locked out. Gone. This access denied message stared back at me in corporate blue and white. But as I stared at it, something else bubbled up through the shock. And hurt. Not anger, not yet, but a cold, clinical curiosity. I tried a different login portal. Access denied. I tried the backup administrative interface I'd built for emergency maintenance. Access denied. I tried the diagnostic portal that barely anyone knew existed. Access denied. Finally, almost as an afterthought, I tried something else. Entirely. A maintenance backdoor I'd created 2 years ago for system monitoring, one that technically wasn't part of the main security infrastructure because it predated most of our current protocols. The screen flickered. Then loaded. Welcome to System Maintenance Portal, user, Madison_Cole_BACKUP. My heart started racing. They'd missed one. In their rush to lock me out, someone had forgotten about an access point that existed in the system's architectural bones. I had maybe an hour before their security audit would detect the login. Maybe less, but an hour was enough. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Richard hadn't just fired me. He'd prepared to fire me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision made during a late-night panic. Someone had to revoke my access. Someone had to coordinate with HR and security. Someone had to plan this. The question wasn't why he'd fired me at midnight, the question was why he'd wanted me to find out now, alone, with no witnesses and no time to respond, and more importantly, what had I discovered that made him desperate enough to fire his most valuable employee? On a Friday night from what sounded like a cocktail party. I pulled up the system logs, fingers flying across the keyboard. If Richard was hiding something, the digital fingerprints would be there. They always were. The search results made my blood run cold. Someone had been accessing financial systems. After hours. Bulk data exports. Transaction modifications. Authorization overrides, all of it traced back to Richard's personal login credentials, all of it happening during times when Richard had alibis, board meetings, client dinners, conference calls I'd personally seen him attend. Someone was using Richard's identity to manipulate the company's financial systems. Either Richard was lying about his whereabouts, or someone else had access to his credentials, but that was impossible. I designed the security protocols myself. Two-factor authentication. Biometric verification, IP address logging. You couldn't just steal someone's login and start moving money around unless I pulled up the authorization logs for Richard's account. Every login, every action, every system access for the past 6 months. The pattern that emerged made me feel sick. The unauthorized access wasn't coming from outside the building. It was coming from inside the executive conference room. During late-night hours when the building should have been empty, someone with physical access to Richard's private office was using his computer directly, bypassing all our remote security measures. Someone who knew his passwords, his biometric data, his access codes, someone Richard trusted completely. Or someone Richard was working with. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen window. The city stretched out below, a constellation of late-night workers and insomniacs. Somewhere out there, Richard Blackwood was probably celebrating, convinced he'd just solved a problem. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. I wasn't just an employee he could discard with a phone call. I was the architect of every system that kept his company running. And I'd built those systems with one very specific principle in mind: never trust anyone completely. Not even your boss, especially not your boss. I didn't sleep. Instead, I made a fresh pot of coffee, pulled out a legal pad, and began writing down everything I knew about Blackwood Dynamics that Richard thought I didn't know. The first item on my list, Project Nightfall. 6 months ago, Richard had called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon. The blinds were drawn, which was unusual. Richard loved natural light, claimed it boosted productivity. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, the one he'd inherited from his father when he took over the company, fingers drumming against its polished surface. "I need you to create a separate server environment," he'd said without preamble. "Completely isolated from our main infrastructure. No backup protocols. No audit logs. No integration with our compliance systems." I'd raised an eyebrow. "That goes against every security protocol we've established." What's it for? Sensitive client data. We're handling some projects that require absolute discretion. Richard, I can create a secure partition within our existing infrastructure. Same level of discretion, but with proper safeguards, no. The word came out sharp, final. This needs to be completely separate. Think of it as a sandbox. For testing purposes. But I'd been in tech long enough to know that when a CEO asks for an invisible server, it's not for testing. Especially when that CEO specifically requests no oversight, no backups, no accountability measures. So I'd given him exactly what he asked for, with a few modifications he'd never think to look for. The server environment was indeed isolated from our main systems. But it wasn't isolated from everything. I'd created what I called a maintenance mirror, a shadow backup system that quietly logged every transaction, every file transfer, every access attempt for diagnostic purposes. Perfectly legal, completely justified, and entirely invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Over 6 months, that shadow system had accumulated quite a collection. The second item, phantom payroll. 3 months ago, I'd been running a routine system optimization when our HR database started throwing error messages. Nothing dramatic, just tiny discrepancies in the payroll calculations. A few hundred here, a couple thousand there, spread across multiple cost centers and pay periods. Most IT directors would have dismissed it as rounding errors or minor accounting glitches. But I'd built the payroll system myself, and I knew it. Didn't make mistakes like that. I'd dug deeper, following the digital breadcrumbs through layers of financial data. What I found was a pattern of payments to companies I'd never heard of. 5 different LLCs, all incorporated in Delaware within the same 2-week period. Meridian Solutions Consulting, Apex Strategic Advisory, Phoenix Development Partners, Summit Technology Services, Pinnacle Business Consulting. All 5 companies were receiving regular payments from Blackwood Dynamics for consulting services that had no corresponding work orders, no project documentation, no deliverables. Each payment was just under the $10,000 threshold that would trigger automatic audit flags. I'd traced the paper trail as far as I could without raising red flags. All 5 companies shared the same registered agent, the same P.O. Box address in Wilmington, the same suspicious pattern of activity. They would receive a payment, then immediately transfer 90% of it to offshore accounts, and they were all connected to Richard's personal attorney, Marcus Steinberg. When I'd flagged the discrepancies to Richard directly, he'd dismissed them as accounting quirks from the acquisition integration. He'd told me to focus on more important projects, but I'd kept digging on my own time. And what I'd found had made my stomach turn. The payments weren't random. They corresponded exactly to our biggest client contracts. Every time Blackwood Dynamics signed a major deal, these phantom companies would receive payments equal to roughly 8% of the contract value. Richard wasn't just stealing from the company. He was taking kickbacks on every major deal we signed. The third item, the Phoenix expansion. Yesterday morning, less than 24 hours ago, I'd completed the final security audit for our Phoenix office launch. 8 months of work, coordinating with local contractors, state regulators, and federal compliance officers. Everything was perfect. Clean. Ready to go live. The Phoenix expansion was supposed to be Richard's crowning achievement. A $50 million investment in a new data center that would position Blackwood Dynamics as a major player in the southwestern market. He'd been talking about it for 2 years, ever since landing the contract with Southwestern Health Systems. Then at 2 p.m., I'd gotten an email from Janet Morrison, our Phoenix site manager of Madison, confused about these last-minute server configuration changes. The new setup creates massive vulnerabilities in our compliance monitoring. Did you approve this? The modifications seem to disable most of our fraud detection protocols. Attached are the revised specifications that came from corporate this morning. Can you review ASAP? We're supposed to go live Monday. Thanks, Janet. I opened the attachment and felt my blood pressure spike. Someone had modified every security protocol I'd spent months designing. The fraud detection systems were neutered. The audit logging was disabled. The compliance monitoring was reduced to basic password protection. It was like someone had taken a fortress and removed all the walls. I immediately called Janet back. Where did these modifications come from? Richard's office sent them directly. Bypassed the entire IT approval chain. Said it was urgent optimization. Based on new federal guidelines. There were no new federal guidelines. I would have known about them. I'd spent the rest of the afternoon creating a detailed report explaining why those modifications would expose us to data breaches, regulatory violations, and potential lawsuits. I'd send it directly to Richard with a red priority flag. His response came 2 hours later. Thanks for the feedback. Implementing as planned. 4 hours after that, I was fired for disloyalty. But here's what Richard didn't understand about the systems I'd built. I didn't just design them to prevent external threats. I designed them to detect internal ones. Every modification to our security protocols was logged with timestamps and user credentials. Every attempted override was flagged and documented. Every unusual access pattern was recorded and analyzed, and all of that information was stored in a place Richard didn't know existed. By sunrise, I had filled 12 pages with dates, names, transaction records, and system logs. A pattern was emerging, not just of financial irregularities, but of systematic attempts to circumvent the security protocols I'd spent 3 years building. But there was something else. Something that made all the pieces fit together in a way that terrified me. The Phoenix expansion wasn't just another data center. According to the contracts I'd reviewed, it was specifically designed to handle financial transaction processing for healthcare systems across 3 states. Massive amounts of sensitive data, regulatory compliance requirements, federal oversight, and someone was trying to launch it with deliberately compromised security. Richard hadn't fired me because I was disloyal. He'd fired me because I was the only person who could expose what he was really building in Phoenix. At 7 a.m., I called my friend Elena Rodriguez. She worked in cybersecurity consulting and had helped me design some of Blackwood's more sophisticated defense systems. More importantly, she had connections in federal law enforcement. Madison? It's early, even for you. Elena, I need a favor. A big one. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you could destroy a company. I explained the situation, carefully, legally, without revealing any proprietary information that could get me arrested for corporate espionage. Elena listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on technical details. So you think he's using company resources for personal business? I think it's worse than that. I think he's using the Phoenix expansion to create a payment processing system that can launder money through healthcare transactions. Millions of dollars, completely untraceable, hidden inside legitimate medical billing. Silence on the other end. Then, Jesus, Madison. That's not just firing territory. That's federal prison territory. Healthcare fraud, money laundering, potentially conspiracy charges. I know. But I need proof. Real proof. And I need to make sure I'm protected when this comes out. What do you need? I glanced at my legal pad, pages of evidence that could either vindicate me or destroy my career forever. I need you to help me document everything before they realize what I know. And I need you to connect me with someone at the FBI who specializes in financial crimes. How much time do we have? I looked at my watch. It was 7:23 a.m. on a Saturday morning. The Phoenix system was scheduled to go live Monday at 9 a.m. About 36 hours. Richard's panic started at exactly 9:03 a.m. That's when the Phoenix office tried to go live with the new server configuration, the security-compromised setup he'd insisted on pushing through. The system lasted exactly 4 minutes before triggering every fraud detection protocol I'd ever written. At 9:07 a.m., the Blackwood Dynamics main dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Automated alerts flooded the IT department. The compliance system locked down every financial transaction pending investigation. And the disaster recovery protocols I designed kicked in, creating secure backups of everything before anyone could think to delete evidence. I know all this because Elena had positioned herself at a coffee shop across from the Blackwood building, watching through binoculars as security guards scrambled and executives rushed in and out of the lobby. My phone started ringing at 9:15 a.m., first call, Trevor Walsh, the interim IT director. Madison, we've got a massive system failure. Nothing's working. We need you back here immediately. I let it go to voicemail, second call, Janet Morrison from Phoenix. Madison, the entire server bank just shut down. The compliance system is showing fraud flags on everything. What's happening? I let it go to voicemail, third call, Richard Blackwood himself. This time, I answered. Richard. Madison, thank God. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. We need to talk. A misunderstanding? I was sitting in Elena's car now, parked outside the federal building downtown. You mean firing me at midnight over the phone was a misunderstanding? The system's crashing. Phoenix is down. The fraud detection is going haywire. We need you to fix this. I could hear the desperation in his voice. Good. That's interesting, Richard. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the system is working exactly as designed. When it detects suspicious financial activity, it locks everything down until the authorities can investigate. Silence. Long enough that I thought he might have hung up. What do you want? I want the truth. About Project Nightfall. About those Delaware shell companies. About why you really fired me. I don't know what you're talking about. Then I guess you'll have to explain it to the FBI. That's when he started screaming. I hung up and walked into the federal building, Elena by my Side carrying a briefcase full of documentation we'd spent the morning organizing. System logs. Financial records. Email chains. Transaction histories. Special Agent Sarah Chen met us in the lobby. Elena had called ahead. Ms. Cole? I understand you have information about potential financial crimes at Blackwood Dynamics. I nodded. And handed her the briefcase. Everything's documented. With timestamps. And I can walk you through the technical architecture that proves systematic fraud. 3 hours later, we walked out of the federal building with a receipt for our evidence submission and business cards for 2 different FBI financial crimes units. My phone rang 47 times. Richard. Trevor. Janet. The chairman of the board. Reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. Even my mother, who'd seen something on the local news about irregularities at Blackwood Dynamics. At 2 p.m., Elena drove me back to my apartment. We sat in her car, watching news vans gather outside the Blackwood building. How long do you think? Before they arrest him, she asked. Depends on what the forensic accountants find. But based on what I documented, I'd say weeks, not months. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number, outstanding work on the Blackwood investigation. When you're ready to discuss new opportunities, we should talk. David Park, and Associate Cybersecurity. Elena read it over my shoulder and laughed. Job offers already? 3, actually. Word travels fast in this industry. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony with Marcus at my feet, watching the sunset paint Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and crimson. The city looked the same as it had 24 hours ago, but everything had changed. My laptop chimed with an email notification. Another job offer, this one from a cybersecurity firm in San Francisco. Starting salary, double what Blackwood had been paying me. I closed the laptop without responding. There would be time for new jobs, new challenges, new systems to build and protect. Right now, I just wanted to enjoy the sunset and the strange satisfaction of a job well done. Richard Blackwood had taught me an important lesson with his midnight phone call. Sometimes being fired isn't the end of your career, sometimes it's just the beginning of someone else's reckoning. 6 weeks later, Richard was arrested on 18 counts of fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. The Phoenix expansion was suspended pending investigation. Blackwood Dynamics filed for bankruptcy protection, but the security systems I'd built? They worked perfectly. Every transaction preserved, every communication logged, every piece of evidence exactly where the FBI needed to find it. I never did clean out my desk. By the time the investigation was complete, there was nothing left to clean out. The entire building had been seized as evidence. These days, I run my own cybersecurity consulting firm. We specialize in protecting companies from the kind of fraud that destroyed Blackwood Dynamics. Business is good. Turns out a lot of CEOs want security systems designed by someone who's actually caught a criminal, and I never, ever answer my phone after midnight, unless I'm expecting the call. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories. Ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.